Welcome everyone to another episode of the Campus Waterfowl podcast. I'm your host Derek Christians. On this episode of the podcast, we're continuing our collegiate waterfowl and wetland research tour. This is, I believe, the last one before hunting season. So you're going to learn a bit about some things that they're doing here at Michigan State. We have, if you guys are watching the video on YouTube, you can see to my right, I got Ben here, who is the PhD student heading this research. And then we got John here with Ducks Unlimited and Scott with Michigan State. But I'll let them introduce themselves. I literally met Scott probably about 20 minutes ago. So I'll let them do the introductions. But yeah, if you guys are listening to this podcast, we greatly appreciate it. I think you're going to be learning a ton in this episode, learning about the research that they're doing here with Mallards. But I'll let Ben, the expert, talk about his research. Ben, do you want to start out with just an introduction, and then we can kind of go around the table here?
Sure. My name is Ben Lukanen. I'm a PhD student here in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University, and I'm working on this project to learn more about movements and population dynamics of Great Lakes mallards.
Yep. Hi, Derek. I'm John Calusi. I'm Director of Conservation Planning for the Great Lakes Atlantic region of Ducks Unlimited, and we have about a 21-state quadrant of the northeast U.S. that we operate in.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for having us and doing this. We appreciate it. I'm Scott Winterstein. I'm a professor here in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University, and most of the work that I'm involved with has to do with population demographics and how do we estimate those, which fits very nicely in this project Ben's doing.
Ben, or I guess everyone kind of chime in here, but Ben mentioned the research that you're doing. I can't even restate word for word what you're doing, but would you mind talking through kind of what kind of sparked this project as a whole and why it's important for this area?
Sure. Yeah, I think it makes sense to kind of start from the beginning. So, and maybe I should start out with what are Great Lakes mallards, right?
Yeah, that would be a good definition to start with.
Yeah. So if you think about mallards in North America, we have 4 flyways: the Atlantic, Mississippi, Central, and Pacific. And so if you look at mallards that nest in and primarily use the Mississippi and Central flyways in the middle part of the continent, those are what are surveyed and managed as mid-continent mallards. And then a subset of that population nests in the Great Lakes region, which includes Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And so those birds are what we're defining as Great Lakes mallards, and that's the population that we're interested in for this research.
Yeah, and as part of that definition of that group of birds is that there are annual breeding population surveys that are conducted in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And so we have pretty darn good long-term data from aerial surveys in the spring each year in terms of where the population is and how it's trending. And there has been a noticeable long-term decline in Great Lakes mallards. Some states, Wisconsin and Minnesota, this last survey period were slightly below the long-term average, so not super concerning, but Michigan's numbers continue to decline. And so that kind of stimulated the whole idea and need for this research, is like trying to figure out what's going on with Great Lakes mallards and why they're declining. And what we saw with the mid-continent mallards that nest in the prairie pothole region, we saw record populations a few years back and a really nice trajectory of increasing population growth, and we did not see the same thing happening in the Great Lakes mallards. At one time, those kind of parallel each other, and then they departed. And so that's really what triggered interest in Great Lakes mallards and what's going on with them.
Yeah, I'll just add there was a pretty widespread drought across much of North America that included the prairies and the Great Lakes, kind of in the late 80s and early 90s, right? And after that, that's when when we came out of the drought, mid-continent mallards really increased, and so did Great Lakes mallards. And traditionally, as John said, those populations had kind of tracked one another. But after that big increase, Great Lakes mallard mid-continent mallard abundance remained high, but Great Lakes mallard abundance in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota all declined. And so we're kind of trying to figure out, why have those trends become decoupled and what factors are limiting the Great Lakes mallard population.
This one started to generate interest, why we needed to do it, based on really people looking at the declining numbers. And additionally, historically, there's been a pretty good relationship between Great Lakes water levels, as the water levels in the Great Lakes come up, mallard numbers have tended to come up, which probably means when the Great Lakes are up, water everywhere is more plentiful. And that relationship also got broken. Great Lakes water levels came up, and the mallards didn't respond the way we predicted. And that, coupled with what we were learning in the other studies, got people, DU in particular here, interested in, all right, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah. And oftentimes with research, you end up with more questions than answers. And we kind of had that conversation earlier today in the car. And so, we never answer everything. And, we get information to help inform decisions. And, for us, habitat programs, Ducks Unlimited, that we're interested in things like that. But despite all the research that's been done on mallards previously, there's still a lot to learn. One thing there's just constant change, right? The landscape is constantly changing. There's stressors on the environment. There's stressor on wetland habitat, remaining upland nesting habitat, grass that mallards nest in, and we have changing climatic conditions. Warmer winters, milder falls, and so there's a whole lot of stuff going on that these birds are having to deal with, and how they react to it. And so we're kind of trying to piece the puzzle together or pick it apart a little bit and try to figure out what's really driving the change for these birds and the challenges they're facing.
And another thing that's happened, Ben, I want to talk about this a little later, as technology changes, some of the questions we can begin to ask change. 10 years ago, the genetic analyses that are being done as part of this project were not even possible to do. Mm-hmm. Even the telemetry technology has changed to the point that the information we get is so different. So they've helped shape where this project can go relative to past projects when John was wandering around with Yagi antennas. And
triangulating, right? And going to different points and compass bearings and trying to cross the lines to figure out where a bird was. And now we've got GPS locations. Everything's GPS. And so we're getting really, really precise information on where these birds are, when. And, the new technology has the ability to capture as many GPS locations as you want. You can program into these things within reason with the battery life, right? Mm-hmm. But a pretty standard right now is taking a location every hour, and we've never been able to have that kind of level of detail and information.
How much do you think, like with these transmitters or being able to kind of give off that much information, like you could go by the hour, do you think even that much information helps with analysis when it comes back to when you start writing and coming back? Like, do you think you need that much information, or is it more information the better?
Yeah, it definitely helps. We were limited, historically when it was labor intensive, time intensive for someone to physically go out there, get a location. You might be lucky to have one per day, right? And that was probably even a lot. And now, we have 48 locations a day in some cases. And so that information allows us to ask more detailed questions and look at fine scale, habitat selection, for example, essentially what these ducks are doing every hour of the day, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I think it depends upon the questions you're trying to ask too. You're really interested in like microhabitat use, then, you may want to dial up the number of locations you're taking a day. But if you're, looking at migration, chronology, and broad scale movements and things like that, maybe a totally different, way you program them and the amount of data that you want. It's an interesting question that you raise, because we, raised as scientists and we talk about statistics, and Scott can talk about that. More is better. Sample size, larger N is always better, and it gives you the ability to have greater inference and tease apart differences, like real differences, and detect that.
Another thing, as an example of, like Ben said, 48. So every half hour we can find these. Back when we were doing triangulation, like you said, you're lucky if you got every animal, every bird once a day. Oftentimes multiple days between locations. And if they moved, the only assumption you could do was, well, they moved in a straight line. I can connect this dot to this dot. Mm-hmm. And now we find out, yeah, sometimes they do, and sometimes they take a scenic route. So just that micro habitat use, micro movement data has changed remarkably what we can do with that.
Yeah, you think back to band recovery, and the initial flyways and migration routes and kind of those connections. I mean, that was really the basis for a lot of how the flyways were developed in the migration corridors, along with some other things like radar and things like that were used long ago, but that we never had the ability. You place a band on a bird, you might get lucky and recapture it if it's still alive, but otherwise, it's harvested by a hunter, it's found dead, and somebody turns in the band, and it's like, yeah, you got point A and point B, and that's it. And you just didn't know, you don't know what happened in between there. And that's what's really exciting about this new technology is that, I mean, we're having the potential now to answer questions across the entire life cycle and potentially over multiple years if we, the radio performance, everything lines up and the batteries stay charged and the birds live multiple years, we can get multiple migrations. And, we're seeing tremendous differences in individual strategies. It's not all one strategy for a bird. Individuals are, hopscotching. Some are taking long-term flights. Multiple stopovers. Some are a few. It's just all over the board. So it's really exciting and interesting.
Although I'm sure sometimes Ben looks at the amount of data that he has to juggle and deal with, and cutting that back by a factor of 100 might not be.
Yeah. Well, it's not always such an issue for me, but my laptop would really appreciate it if it didn't have to churn through 3 million locations.
Sounds like your advisor needs to invest in a better computer for you.
I told him if we needed to, we'd get some supercomputer time, but
we got a pretty good one.
Yeah.
But I mean, in those days of, if you had 100 locations on an individual, that was huge. And now, like Ben's saying, across all these birds, we're in the millions.
Yeah. Yeah, it opens up your sample size question, and that opens up all sorts of potential analyses. And Scott could speak to this better than me. I'm way out of that realm, but how many points is adequate, and to get the same kind of answer and same kind of information, using all the data versus a partition of it, a subsample of it, if you will. And it's like, and that can help inform future studies.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of thinking, where it's like, because it just seems like a lot of research that's going on now is like questions that we've had from previous projects, and it's like the projects that are happening now with like these high-tech GPS transmitters, it's like what kind of questions can be formed to then maybe inspire future projects, and it's like who knows what's even coming around the corner.
and we've had to look at stuff independently by life cycle period, so we were involved in a breeding study on Great Lakes mallards long ago, but we didn't have the ability to evaluate what happened on breeding grounds, and how that may affect subsequent migration, condition of birds, winter survival. And it's just like now it's just like we have this opportunity with this technology to start linking so-called cross-seasonal effects, things that might happen on wintering areas or staging areas may affect productivity of birds on the breeding grounds. And so it's like trying to tease that apart and get at that stuff. It's like, it's pretty cutting edge and exciting place where we are. And there are a lot of people using this technology on a variety of species right now. So we're going to learn a whole lot, and Ben's right on the leading edge of it too with this study. And so it's really cool.
And this project, how long are we into this project? And again,
we started marking birds in spring of 2021.
Okay. And how many birds have you guys put transmitters on since?
Right now we're a little over 530 hen mallards across 5 Great Lakes states with transmitters. Yeah, so it's we have an awesome group of partners. The only way that we've achieved the sample size and the great geographic scope is through partnerships.
That's talking about information. Jeez.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think back to when we worked on some satellite transmitter studies, the predecessor to this kind of more current technology where you use satellites, but it was GPS. But I mean, we had a sample size of 68 hen black ducks, and we thought we were rocking and rolling. And he's got 500 plus, and there's a similar study going on with eastern mallards, that we're hoping to put 1,200 units on, and there's a black duck study that's got a sample size of 500, and so we're we're sitting at a point where we're going to start learning a whole lot about these birds, about movement ecology, and we talked about mining data. I mean, Ben will probably be retired by the time, he won't have, you could mine this data for all sorts of questions beyond the scope of his project. And, as a grad student, you've got a fixed window to look at this stuff, and your tendency is to want to look at all these things, but you got to stay focused on your project objectives, and you can only do so much, on that. But we'll have this data forever moving forward. And people can mine it for other questions. How do birds interact with refuge during the hunting season and things like that? There's some researchers looking at that down in Tennessee and to the south of us and things along those lines. But those aren't our objectives with this study. So, but that data will be there collected and available forever for people to mine and learn more. So,
yeah, it's crazy to think about. Yeah, wrap your head around what kind of questions can come out of all this data that Ben's kind of heading. So it's kind of fun to see.
What drives migration? Every year we hear, where are the ducks? Oh, it was late migration, or they just didn't show up. Well, did they or not? And it's now it's we can have evidence. It's just yep, we can look at the timestamps of the GPS locations. These birds they migrated. They were available during the hunting season, but they were just smarter than we were, and found the safe spots to live another day and survive and reproduce.
Ben, so when it comes to just kind of the lifestyle of being a grad student, kind of what does your, day-to-day schedule look like when you do this type of work?
Sure, yeah, it's very, very seasonally dependent. Right now in the summer, I'm working very closely with Michigan DNR, who bans ducks every year. So we're working with them to put GPS transmitters on mallards. And that's primarily our main field work. We're marking birds primarily in the summer and a few in the spring. Then the rest of the year, I balance my time between coursework and then working on analyses. And even once in a while, I get to do kind of outreach stuff like this.
Kind of before, because you're a PhD student, you've been doing this stuff for a while now. Where did you do your undergrad and master's program at?
I did my undergrad right here at Michigan State in FW. Did the wildlife concentration. And then right after that, I moved on to a master's degree at Iowa State, where we looked at movement and survival of Canada geese in urban and rural areas. So kind of two similar sources of data. We used both banding data and GPS data from those geese. And now I came back to Michigan State and working on the Mallard project.
Did anything surprise you coming into becoming a PhD student that you didn't really expect part of the gig was at all? Any surprises there?
I guess not really surprises in terms of kind of student life, but I guess some of the surprises have come in terms of what we're starting to learn with this data.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you're seeing?
For me, the biggest surprise is that I should back up maybe a little bit and say, so all these birds that we're marking with transmitters, we're also taking a blood sample.
Okay.
And with that blood sample, we can look at the bird's genotype, so we can determine whether each bird we put a transmitter on is a pure wild mallard, or if that bird is a hybrid between a wild and a domestic mallard. And we've been fortunate to be able to partner with Dr. Phil Lavretsky at the University of Texas, El Paso. And so he's helping us analyze those blood samples and to determine, do we have wild birds, do we have hybrids? And we have a surprising proportion of hybrid mallards in the Great Lakes region. Somewhere around 60% of the birds we put transmitters on have been wild, and about 40% hybrids. And so that was really pretty surprising. It's not something that I had expected.
How does that then change how you kind of look at the landscape then in the research, I guess?
Yeah, so one of the things we're able to do then is to pair those genetic results with behavior. So we can see, what do wild birds do, what do hybrids do, and we're finding that birds that are less than about 50% wild are behaving quite different than wild mallards. So those hybrids that are more on the domestic end of the spectrum tend to move around less. They tend to be pretty sedentary. Their daily movement distances are about half that of wild birds. They tend to be less likely to migrate, and they have high selection for developed land cover or high selection for urban areas, essentially cities.
Okay. And so now having that information, and too, like, once this project is all kind of said and done, kind of where does it go from there? I guess, how does this information help kind of just everyone?
In addition to the GPS transmitter data, we're also looking at banding data, which has been accumulated for a very long time. We're going to look at the last 30 years worth of banding data, and so we're going to get a very in-depth perspective on what individual birds do using our GPS transmitter data, and then we're going to be able to pair that and look at population dynamics. So the banding data in combination with aerial survey data allows us to estimate population size, survival, productivity, or how many ducklings are produced on average. And so we'll be able to kind of pair those individual behaviors with population dynamics and hopefully determine what population parameters are limiting for the population and what are some of the things that are affecting those parameters.
Can we digest that some more?
Yeah, so maybe step back and describe population parameters in simplistic terms, break it down to,
So population parameters are anything that affects how many mallards we have.
Okay.
So what's the survival rate? What's the birth rate, or how many juvenile mallards are recruited into the population? So what is the nest success? What is duckling survival? And ultimately, if a hen has a successful nest, ducklings survive, those are recruited individuals in the population. And then one of the other ones we were interested in is emigration. So whether birds are leaving the population, because that could be one way that we're losing mallards. And emigration is not very well assessed by banding data alone, and that's one of the benefits of these GPS transmitters, is we're able to see if female mallards that hatch in the Great Lakes return to the Great Lakes to nest, or are they leaving to nest elsewhere, for example, out in the prairie pothole region.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And we've never been able to look at that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then if we get multiple years of data from hens, it's like, are they returning to the same general area? Are they showing fidelity, phylopatry to nesting areas and those types of things? And the other questions are, do we have rural birds that move into urban environments and vice versa? I mean, there's all sorts of questions that can be answered. And I think what's going to be also interesting is the habitat use part of this, and then linking some of the parameters that Ben talked about to habitat use. What does a successful hen look like in terms of habitat use, and then that detailed information? And it's like, is that something that we can use as a template or a blueprint, if you will, to develop habitat programs that are most meaningful for creating successful situations for mallards? And that's where Ducks Unlimited comes in. I mean, that's our product on the ground, habitat conservation. That's part of what my job is investing in research like this. It's very applied, that we can turn around and use that to inform our habitat programs. And that's being science-based and trying to be efficient as much as we can with our limited dollars that we all have.
Yeah, I mean, these fine-scale data let us do lots of things, particularly this urban-wild comparison can lead to a lot of areas. One example, who knows if it'll end up there, but the aerial surveys we do to count ducks don't survey urban areas. And, if we got ducks moving into urban areas more than the vice versa, more than ones moving out of urban areas, they're not getting counted. They're not susceptible to the hunting season if they're in these urban areas. So what impact does that have? And how is that related to the genetic information that Ben's getting? So that could, if we start looking for future things that can be done, that's just one possibility.
Yeah.
You bring up the survey. Actually, the numbers from when this podcast was recorded, I think they were released last week, the BPOP numbers. But one thing we kind of look at with urban areas, it's, you don't want, like they did a video about how those are conducted and how they use the planes. It's like in the video, I think they said they're flying pretty low to the ground. So obviously you're not going to fly a plane that low to the ground in an urban area. But do you think the potential of like drone technology could get to that point where you could survey out ducks in those urban areas?
That's a good question. I'm not sure you could do it at the scale necessary. And it's labor intensive. It's not like you can just throw a drone up in the air and let it fly at a transect and be done with it, and record information. There are parameters with the FAA that you need to, you need to be trained. You can't fly in certain areas. Sometimes permits are involved in things like that. And it always has to be in line of sight. Mm-hmm. So that could be a real problem in urban environments.
We get seduced a bit by watching the movies with the military drones, and their drones can stay in the air for hours and hours at a time. Yeah, we don't have that technology yet. As John said, line of sight, pretty limited time in the air.
And then you're going to encounter the public that privacy issues. They see a drone flying low over their backyard wetland and things like that, and so there's personal privacy issues too that come into play there.
A little anecdote about this project. Ben did his undergraduate here. He did a senior thesis with me, and so I knew Ben's capabilities. And then he went away to do a master's project, and before he left, we'd even talked about him coming back to MSU to do his PhD. And I thought, this would be great. Love to have Ben come back. And this project originally had been slated to be funded a year earlier than when Ben was going to be available. So he would have been in the middle of his master's program the year this project was going to start, which meant he would not have been able to come do it. And at the very last minute, there were some budget issues, and they said, well, we can't start this project this year. We're going to have to realign the funding. It's just not going to happen this year. That delayed everything a year. And at that point, Ben was done with his master's degree. And he could be we interviewed about 3 or 4 people for this. We had a committee. Ben came out on top. Yep, this is the guy we want. And Ben's been here, and the project has just been going great. But if it had been funded the year before, we'd be sitting with somebody else now.
Yeah. So it was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
And as Ben said before, partnerships, we had to explain to the partners, we're going to have to wait a year. But we'll do it. We just have to wait a year.
I think that's something, you bring up a good point, kind of, and I don't think I've had discussions about this on the research podcast, but just all the stuff that happens behind the scenes to even get a project going. Yeah. So we got John here. How does DU, I guess, look at finding projects, or how do you work with even universities? It seems like, to then get Ben.
I think it starts with a question, an idea, an issue, and in this case, Great Lakes mallard declines, and so we all have interest in that. Obviously, Ducks Unlimited has interest in that. I have interest in that, and so, we work together. Another way that we develop research ideas is through our habitat joint venture planning. We have a waterfowl committee that developed a waterfowl strategy, bird habitat models, and things like that. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but we made a lot of assumptions with our habitat models to come up with habitat objectives, and so there's always information uncertainty and information gaps, and so that's part of it too. So we've identified research priorities, so a lot of that comes out of that as well, and so and then it's communication. Our group of people that are interested in waterfowl and wetlands is pretty small, and we know folks, all the academics across the country. In my region, I work with a number of them, sometimes out of the region as well, but we have good relationships, and so it's communication and coming up with ideas, and then it's from there. It's like, okay, that's good. So you start fleshing out a 1-page kind of scope kind of thing, and start putting some budget numbers together. What's it going to take to get a PhD student like Ben, and field work and radio transmitter costs, and so you put pen to paper and get a draft budget together, And then you just start looking for partners and funding. And it's like, because we're not handed a budget, Scott's not given a multi-million-dollar budget to go out and do research, and either is Ben, and I'm not either. So that's part of my job at Ducks Unlimited, is trying to develop partnerships and unearth money. And in this case, we had a very generous donor in our region step forward and give us a substantial amount of money to buy a whack of transmitters for this study. And so that kind of was part of my job, finding that money. And I knew, talking to Scott and Ben, that they were looking for money that was out there on the street. They were drumming the bushes, beating the bushes for money. And so it's like, okay, I'll see if I can find some money. And it's, this is an important topic for us, for our organization, for waterfowl conservation in general. And we were lucky enough to find some and come through. And so that was really good. But that's kind of how that operates. And it's like, it's super rewarding. I feel like it's not only the science and the information that we're getting out of this, we're also getting professionals like Ben, so when he finishes up, he's going to be on the market for a job, and he's going to be a guy that can step into my role someday, or Scott if he chooses to go academia and those types of things. So it's just like, for us, we're helping create that next generation of waterfowl and wetland professionals, and I think that's super important for Ducks Unlimited. And for me personally, I enjoy it. Enjoy interacting with Scott, enjoy interacting with Ben. I get out in the field once in a while. They make an old guy feel good. Get my hands on a duck today, so that was super. Makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I'd also say success breeds success. So you start off with our earlier projects with DU were smaller, and they were successful, and you've had that successful working relationship, and you come to John and say, we got this project, but boy, we could really use some money for transmitters, and there they are.
Yeah.
So
if that first project hadn't gone well, I may have not looked so hard, No.
Well,
but it is working relationships. It really is. It's like you need to be comfortable with each other. There needs to be trust and those types of things, and expectations and accountability, and we have all that. And those are, you want to work and surround yourself with people you enjoy doing work with, and make it the most enriching experience that you can have. And that's really our job for Ben too, is like create an environment where he is being fully enriched in his PhD program here and getting everything out of it he can, and he becomes the best professional that he can be.
Yeah, he gets to have all the fun, right?
Out in the field.
Out in the field, sometimes I know it's not the fun, but part of my job as a major professor is to take care of all that other stuff in the background, so Ben doesn't have to deal with it, so he can be the one out there doing the field work, doing the science. And fortunately on this one, like you say, the opportunity to interact with a wider group of people is just great for his professional development. You've been to flyway meetings, you've done workshops, all the partners, other places. You're doing, podcasts like this. Yeah. Trust me, when I was a graduate student, they're nothing close to this.
Yeah. You might get asked to, comment on an article or be a part of an article. That was about as far as it went when I was in grad school. And there wasn't any radio show or podcast or anything like that. Yeah, I'm usually the one, the one partner that's like pushing all these opportunities, because our communications folks, it's important for Ducks Unlimited to get the word out on what we're doing and why, and the research is intriguing, and it helps proliferate interest in research and science, our program with Ducks Unlimited, and stimulates funding and things like that. But then I gotta reach out to Ben, and Ben's got to reach out to Don. It's like, hey, you guys okay with having Derek come up, and and oh, by the way, another guy from NPR wants to come out, and it's just like it's all part of it though, because it's a great opportunity for Ben, because that's going to be part of his professional career moving forward too. And it's just like you got to be out front on a lot of the stuff, and it's an important part of our job too. We tend to be a little introverted as scientists, and that got beat out of me pretty hard when I came to work for Ducks Unlimited, because you get thrown out there in all sorts of situations. I can't even count how many presentations I've done and where and all those kinds of things. But it's super rewarding though, because you get excited, talking about what you're working on, and then you see people light up, and that's, if you can express that enthusiasm to the crowd, it gets them jazzed up too. And
whether they're, and we kind of touched on this on our last podcast, whether they're duck hunters or outdoorsmen or not, like outreach opportunities like this, and just any type of media outlet is just a way to kind of expand our audience, and then kind of share how, and hopefully, they see how much we love doing this type of stuff, and helps pretty much fund kind of what we're doing. So if they can too, like if they're purchasing outdoor goods and things like that, help fund projects like this.
Yeah, and just and letting folks know that people do care about what's going on with Great Lakes mallards, and we're doing something about it. We are investing money in research, and Ducks Unlimited is, Michigan DNR is, Michigan State University is. We've got Franklin College in Indiana. We got Illinois Natural History Survey and the Illinois DNR, Wisconsin DNR. Who am I missing? I don't want to leave anybody out, Ben, so help me out.
We got Winers Point Marsh Conservancy in Ohio. We've got the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Upper Mississippi and Great Lakes Joint Venture, and related the Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife Restoration Act. And let's see, who else? University of Texas, El Paso.
Yep. Yeah, so you think of like pulling that all together and into a complete package. It's pretty impressive. But I mean, to do a project at the scale, I mean, that's what's necessary. Because nobody can put all the resources together for a project like this on their own. And if they do, I'd like to know who they're getting the money from.
Well, what you alluded to also is these opportunities to reach beyond that. We're not just singing to the choir anymore. I mean, this information gets out to people who would never think that they're going to go duck hunting. They would never think about these things, but start to realize the broader importance of these. And you start layering on things like climate change. You start layering on things like, habitat change, and hey, wait a minute, what if we start having these wildfires that come through here? What in the world does that mean for? I think it just raises that awareness across the board, and that's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
I think hearing firsthand from professionals that are doing the work, rather than just someone leading like assumptions, is just crucial. So having the information out there is much better than people drawing assumptions. So, Ben, what are some of the things over the years that probably the most memorable moments for you doing research and things? What are some things that you've done?
Yeah, well, kind of extending what we were just talking about, it's really a privilege to work with this great group of partners. It's an awesome group of people, and as a kid, I was always, I grew up a hunter and a fisherman. I was always interested in, what are the ducks doing during the bulk of the time that we're not watching them. And now with this new technology, we get just a really comprehensive picture across a huge geographic region, what so many different individual ducks are doing. And so that's been really rewarding, just to be able to kind of, get a glimpse into the secret life of ducks, so to speak.
Well, I mean, the partners on this project, to go back, have been great. One individual who used to be in Wisconsin took a job in Louisiana, but said, I got to stay on the project. I want to stay involved. I started with you guys. That kind of buy-in, you get it. It's almost priceless. You build something like that, which is Ben. I mean, Ben is one in charge of care and feeding of the partners.
That's a lot on your plate. Is it a lot of pressure for you?
Initially, yeah, I was a little concerned. We've got people from state and federal agencies, non-governmental, university. It's just a really diverse group, and thought, how the heck am I gonna coordinate all these folks and make sure everyone knows what's going on? But I think a lot of the success comes from the fact that we have such great partners. It's just been awesome to work with everybody, and everybody's really invested in the project because everyone's interested in the results and what we're going to learn and how we're going to be able to apply that to, benefit ducks and people interested in ducks.
And you put out your monthly updates.
That helps.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm one of the needier partners, and because we have reporting responsibilities to our donors that support this type of work, and Ben has been super about providing information for that and sharing that with me and helping me with put the reports together and get that information out, because that only helps us in the future, like stewarding that donor, that partner, and the next time we have a project like this come around that's really important, we can go back to that individual and ask them again, for support. That's really important.
But Ben puts out pretty pictures each month of the duck movements.
It helps when you have really cool data.
Yeah.
You get to watch where these ducks are going and what they're doing for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the whiz bang stuff that the people really like to see. It's like, oh wow, that's really cool. It's so pointing out those really interesting things, and I created a slide of some irregular nest sites. I don't know that anything's irregular for a mallard.
I was just going to ask that. Is there any outliers, or what are some crazy birds? Are they doing crazy things out there?
All over the map.
Really?
Yeah, all over the map. And this was from another mallard study that we have going on, a similar project that I talked about previously. But yeah, in the crotch of a tree and a flower pot next to somebody's driveway. We had one that was literally nesting in a landscaping feature of an outdoor spa, like a spa you could go to, a private spa, like right next to this hot tub, and it's just like, it's just crazy. And then you have the more typical stuff. You had one up in Maine and some of the most gnarly brush that you'd ever seen, and you're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. And then we had one up in Quebec near Montreal, where this female decided to nest in this manure pit, and it was like a concrete sided structure, round manure pit, like waist high, on a human being, and choked with a Phragmites mat, and it's just like, well, that's a great choice to have a successful nest, but what are you going to do when the ducklings hatch? Mm-hmm. It's like they're not going to get out of there. The female can hop out or fly out, but the ducklings are stuck there. So I don't know if that farmer decided to put a little plank in there and hatch, or what happened there. But anyway, yeah, it's just all over the board. So and that's what's interesting to me too on this, is like we think of mallards as being like this really super adaptable species, and you see that in a lot. They're generalists, but the fact that this population here is struggling is kind of intriguing in itself. It's just like, well, mallards should be doing great, but they're not.
Ben, when you're looking at kind of the migration of these mallards, is there, obviously all of them you're capturing in Michigan. Is there areas where a lot of them are migrating to when they go south that are more where would you say the majority of them are going?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I'll start out with the fact that the majority of our ducks choose not to migrate.
Really?
Yep, especially birds that spend a lot of time in urban areas, which tend to be the birds that have more domestic ancestry. And one of the things we're considering with climate change is that winters are becoming more mild up here. Ducks are able to find more areas with open water, and in urban areas, oftentimes they're receiving supplemental feed. So we definitely see individuals take advantage of that. When our birds do migrate, it's primarily wild birds that are departing on migration, but they're behaving a lot like we might expect Canada geese to, in that they seem to only go as far south as they need to find food in open water. We haven't had any birds that have gone farther south than Tennessee, and most are kind of in that Tennessee to Kentucky to even southern Indiana and Ohio latitude.
How does it, because you guys get a decent amount of snow up here, right? Is it more snow rather than cold?
It's variable.
Kind of back and forth.
Lately, it's kind of hit or miss, and we've had some winters that we haven't had a whole lot of snow, and then there's, we get a dump, and it's not long lived, and so I grew up in Wisconsin, and I remember as a kid, waist high snow and stuff like that, and just deep cold, frigid cold through February, and big snow banks and snow cover everywhere. And I just don't feel like we see that like we used to see.
There's not much snow cover on the fields anymore.
Well, you consider that. It's like, well, in the Great Lakes, I think last year, I mean, did they even freeze over entirely? I don't think they did. And so that's kind of a barometer too. It's like when you don't have water bodies freezing over and you don't have snow cover, it's just like, Ben said, it's like there's nothing really driving mallards. They're big bodied birds like Canada geese, and they can store a lot of fat. They can survive for several days without foraging, and so they're pretty hardy birds, and they'll just do what they got to do to get by. And
in this area, what's the main food source for mallards? what do they primarily eat?
That's a good question.
The answer is it depends, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of wetland foods. Yeah, obviously moist soil plants that produce high energy seeds, but then also, mallards are very adept at exploiting waste grain in cornfields and winter wheat fields that have been harvested. So I mean, they exploit a lot of different things.
Yeah, you'll find them down on the ag fields here on the campus, along with the Canada geese, just foraging through for waste corn, the stuff that came off the fields.
Yeah,
there too.
Yeah, I mean, they waterfowl are pretty remarkable, mallards included, in terms of like their ability to exploit resources and taking advantage of things. I'm just thinking back to some black duck research we did years ago, and we actually found, killifish in black ducks, and you're like, are they out there actively foraging for killifish? They're kind of hard to catch, but then you think about like a salt marsh pan, a low tide, and they get stranded in there, and it's like, well, this individual bird that happened to be harvested, and then we did a food habits sample on, was just chock full of killifish, and the opportunity probably presented itself, and probably abnormal, that's not the norm, but to me, that just speaks to their adaptability and, how they take advantage of situations and exploit resources.
Yeah, but as you get at the changing climate stuff becomes a big issue on some of this, and Ben can speak to it a bit more, but everybody in your thesis, your dissertation, you guys are like, okay, well, tell us what's going to happen next. What are your predictions? And makes predicting really difficult.
Is there anything like, I don't know if it'd be worth doing, but like air temperatures day to day? Like, is there tools that to then correlate, the day-to-day temperatures to, like, now with its transmitter technology, like you can see how temperatures are. I don't know if temperatures is a good thing to look at, whether or not it moves ducks or not, but I don't know if you're able to see any driving forces of why ducks move.
I think temperature is part of it, but it's also related to consecutive temperature days. There has been some research done on that by Dr. Mike Schumer. He developed a weather severity index, which included temperature, but then also snow cover. And, there's definitely an influence of those two things that drives birds to migrate. And there's going to be some situations with some of these urban birds, that are on river systems around, Grand Ledge or wherever, that they're getting hand feed and stuff like that can scratch out a living. But in those types of conditions, like multi-day sub-zero temperatures, and you're going to see movements of most birds. You would expect to.
Yeah, and for our wild birds, those two factors, temperature and snow cover, are good predictors of when they choose to migrate. And one of the benefits of having such a broad geographic sample is that we've put transmitters on birds all the way from Indiana and Ohio up to the upper peninsula of Michigan and northern Wisconsin. And so we can see, birds that are on the northern edge of the Great Lakes range are more impacted by those weather events and climate because, those are more extreme up there. And so those are birds that tend to be more likely to migrate than birds in the southern Great Lakes.
Are you like constantly hitting refresh when those like cold pushes come through, like wanting to see if these birds are moving?
Yeah. These transmitters are programmed to send data once every 24 hours, as long as they have a good cell signal. So I'm able to monitor essentially what the birds are doing for the last 24 hours. And it's it can become a little addicting to log in and look at the data and see, wow, look at that bird, just moved 300 miles south or whatever. So, yep, definitely.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And then you also need to be perusing the data for mortalities periodically, because these transmitters aren't cheap. They're $1,100-$1,200 depending upon the exchange rate, and you want them back, right? And so, we try to coordinate that. Ben probably is doing all that and then looking through that. And when we have a mortality, it's like he's connecting with somebody locally, whether it's in Michigan or Wisconsin, to see if somebody can run out there and see if they can find it. And we had 3 birds last year that my son and I went out to try to find. And these were birds that actually crossed over and came over here from the Eastern Mallard study. They were marked on the Atlantic coast during winter and came over here to breed, and they weren't so successful. We had 3 of them, but it's remarkable how accurate the location data is, because I was able to just take my phone out and put the coordinate in and walk right to it. Mm-hmm. My son found it before I did. He's younger eyes than me, but we're able to find 2. So, but yeah, there's that, and then just looking at the location information and looking at weather events and how that moves birds. And
do you have like favorite birds in your population? Like ones that, have you named them at all?
No, well,
not names you can say on the air.
They each have their own unique identifier, which is a alphanumeric, but they don't have names like Sue or whatever. So I do kind of have birds that I wouldn't really call them my favorite, but like they tend to be really interesting. So I kind of am partial to those birds, or just want them to survive so I can continue to see what they're doing. But one of the things you tend to learn when you monitor this many birds so closely is that they really are all individuals. You could have 3, let's just say 3 adult hen mallards that you catch and put transmitters on at one site, and you think, well, those birds are probably going to hang out and do the same thing, and they may go do 3 totally different things, and they kind of have their own little tendencies and quirks.
It's really cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I might just add for some of your listeners might be waterfowl hunters, and so if you were happy to or lucky enough to harvest one of these transmitters from this study, it has my email and phone number on the side. So I'd ask that you give me a call or shoot me an email and let me know that you harvested the bird, because that's good information. One of the things we're looking at are cause-specific mortality, so whether birds are killed by predators or by hunters. And it also helps us to be able to get the transmitter back and use it on another bird as long as it's not damaged, to collect more data. So that helps us out. And also, if you're lucky enough to harvest a banded bird, report your bands, because that's the other side of this study, is that we're looking at banding data, and we really rely on hunters. Hunters are the reason that we know as much as we do about mallards, because of the sheer number of band recoveries that we're able to get.
That's super important. That's a good point.
Yep.
And they don't just, and when they call you about the transmitter, they usually have something in return for them as well.
Yep, that's a good point. Yep, they get a reward. What we've been doing is the hunter's choice of either a replica GPS transmitter or a $50 Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops gift card.
Nice. So there's no need. Like, obviously, a lot of hunters tend to want to mount those birds because they do have the backpack on them. There's no need for you to keep the backpack. You get a replica.
That's right.
And if you do, Ben will know where you're at.
That's right. Yep. There have been multiple occasions where you see a duck's flying around, then goes from the marsh to the parking lot, and then the transmitter goes down the road at 70 miles an hour, and then there's a bunch of locations on top of someone's house, and they don't call it in. I'm going to figure out who lives there and give you a call.
Yeah.
I guess, I didn't even touch on that. You mentioned speed. So what kind of measurements are you guys getting from these transmitters? Yeah,
it's remarkable how many different things they collect. So they take, obviously, a GPS location. They take what's called an accelerometer reading. So you can think of it a lot like the tilt sensor in your smartphone. That changes kind of, if you tilt to the side, the screen changes.
Okay.
So it measures the gravitational acceleration in 3 dimensions, so we can see, what position the transmitter's in. That helps us to detect mortalities. We can also use that to estimate the bird's behavior at each location. We can see if a bird is sitting in one spot and it's not moving around a whole lot. We can infer that bird's incubating a nest, for example. Transmitters also take temperature, speed, altitude. I think maybe a compass bearing. I think those are the main ones.
Yeah, I don't think I've looked at all of them. I pull the accelerometer chart up and I'll scroll down to some and look at temperature and a few things like that, but I don't think I've ever made it to the full bottom. But
one more that comes to mind is light intensity. They have a small solar panel on top of the transmitter that allows it to recharge, and so we can see if that solar panel is getting light or not.
That's cool. Is there any information like there whether or not like mallards are during the day in shadow cover or like covered areas versus like sun areas? Are you able to use that information for anything, you think?
Yeah, it's something we can infer. It'd be a combination of looking at, a satellite image or a land cover map for that location, and because sometimes the transmitter might not be getting sun because it's cloudy, or sometimes a bird will preen a feather or two that partially covers the transmitter solar panel. But yeah, you can use that to somewhat infer kind of the amount of sun a bird's getting.
yeah, we noticed on a lot of our birds that we inferred were nesting, incubating, if you will, that we saw declines in battery recharge, and you're just kind of hopeful that it doesn't zero out. Technically, they should come back from zeroing out the battery going to almost nothing, and when they get back in sunlight again. But sometimes it's hard for those birds, those transmitters to recover. But yeah, with some of the cover that these birds are nesting in, it's not surprising. It's it's all over the place. But yeah, I think, Ben, you had a few birds on one wetland, and one transmitter was 100%, and the other one was like 60 or something like that, somewhere less. And it's just like it's in the same wetland, same environment. It's like, well, it could be just something behavioral where that hen was covering up with feathers, and you don't want that thing sticking up so high on the back that it becomes, an obstruction for the bird in terms of flight and drag. And then, the higher it sits up, there's opportunities for icing and things like that can occur if the wrong conditions happen, real wind and cold temperatures and rain and freezing rain, things like that. And you can get ice accumulation on those things, and the higher the panels sit up, the worse it can be. And so we're trying to, you don't want to deal with that. So there's trade-offs with feather coverage and the hen kind of covering things up when she's tucked up and comfortable ball, and then the other thing is just sitting on a nest with overhead cover. You have that too. No, we covered a lot of ground. I thought
ton of information there. Any kind of final thoughts you guys have on the project of kind of how things are going, or what the future holds, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really thankful to be a part of the project. It's essentially a dream come true for me. I set a goal for myself to be a wildlife research biologist at some point, and I've really come to appreciate waterfowl. So this is an amazing opportunity. I'm really learning a lot, and I think the combination of this awesome GPS data set and banding data set is going to really allow us to make some useful inferences about population dynamics that managers can put into practice to hopefully improve the Great Lakes mallard population.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Ben finds with the analyses and that, and we're getting tidbits here and there. You don't really dive into your analysis until you collect all the data. You do bits and pieces of it, but that's only part of the picture, and so that's the tip of the iceberg. So I'm looking forward to seeing the whole picture and all of the iceberg, and reading his dissertation and seeing publications, and in turn using that information to inform what we do.
Yeah, you start these things at the beginning. John talked about, it's a piece of paper, and you try to convince the people with the money. In this case, Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife Restoration Fund. At first, it's like, yeah, great. And another study, they're going to put radios on another bird and follow. No, it's way more than that. And this project has developed into way more than that. And the capabilities, like, go back to the genetic stuff and that was not something that we even expected. I mean, it was actually even a little add-on kind of thing. Well, if we can, we'll go get the genetic information. And, Ben, showed us the first returns on that, and it was like, oh, wow, okay, this is something. And that's what's really exciting about this. That integration with the micro precise movement data and the banding pulled into it it's really going to tell us a lot. And then it's going to generate, as John said, twice as many questions of what we want to do next.
Yeah. And you talked earlier about long-term plans for studies like this. It would be so nice to have something operational on a scale like this that we could continue on. Because, again, we're getting a 3-year, maybe 4-year snapshot with this data, maybe 5 years of data, depending, we can't keep Ben forever. His PhD program's got to end. So just getting long-term information over time and continuing to mark birds and start looking at climatic impacts and things like that and weather pattern things and all, we got a snapshot of, 3 years of deployments and how these birds interact with the landscape and the habitat. But then also we've got all these weather variables and other things we could be looking at, disturbance and all those kinds of things. And so it'd be really cool long term to have operational money to fund something in the long term, but that's pretty rare. Long-term studies of wildlife in general are pretty darn rare.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work we're doing is on the backs of graduate students, and so they're here for 2 or 3 years of field research, and then they're off, and so, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely on the backs of graduate students. I mean, this is Ben's project. I mean, the success of this project is 99% his efforts and what he's been able to accomplish. And so much of what we learn about wildlife, anything, is graduate students. So,
There you go.
yeah.
Yep.
Graduate students everywhere. Pat yourself on the back.
It's a great opportunity for people that are interested in the wildlife, natural resources, the outdoors. It's a very fulfilling career. We can all attest to that. It's a passion of all three of ours, and it's a great career choice. It's something at the end of the day, I go home from my job at Ducks Unlimited and feel good about what I do, and that's important. It's very important.
Yeah. So if you're out there listening, graduate school, think about it.
Yeah. Always looking for the next Ben Luukkonen.
Yep.
We need more.
I guess even Scott, even calling out undergraduates, what if someone's interested in getting into this type of work? What kind of undergraduate majors would kind of come into these type of programs?
Well, the obvious one is if it's called Fish and Wildlife, of which there really aren't that many still called that now. There's departments of conservation biology. There's departments of applied ecology. In a lot of places, it's something like natural resources, where the forestry and the fisheries and wildlife have been combined. You're just going to have to do a little bit of digging and seeing, who's offering what courses, the kinds of things that are related to management.
Mm-hmm. And are you talking just management as a whole, whether if someone wants to specialize in kind of waterfowl, is there more just that's because that management word is that just general?
The management word is general. If you're looking, you really want to do waterfowl, you're going to have to do a little bit more digging, because the way universities are organized now are not so much around species-specific areas. They're more systems-oriented. And so there's not that many places left where you'll find somebody who's listed as, a professor of waterfowl ecology. They're more likely to be under something like wetlands ecology, something like that. So you're going to have to get online. In the old days, you had to go find the book in the library, but now you get online and you look at the professors, and they'll have blurbs upon the kinds of things they do. And if you're interested in that, you dump them an email. Tell them a little bit about yourself. Tell them you're interested in what they're doing, that you want to work on waterfowl, and do they have any openings? Now, having said that, I'm going to retire in a year, so I'm not taking any more students. Ben's my last student, so save yourself some time, because if you send me that email, I'm going to say, sorry, I'm retiring. I'm not taking any more students. It's going to take a little bit of homework to do. The other thing I would encourage students to do, everywhere around the country, there are regional kinds of meetings. There's the thing, we have one, Midwest Fish and Wildlife Conference. There's a southeastern one. There's a northwestern one. You can find it. Go to it. They're in your region. Go to it, and you'll meet the people who are doing the kind of work you're interested in. Going to take a little effort. It's like finding a job. But the people are out there, and if it's what you're interested in doing, if that's where your passion is, go for it and keep going for it. You get one rejection letter, I'm retiring, I'm not taking any students. Go, oh, well, enough of that. Nope. You keep going.
I have a story on that I could share from a personal experience. When I was applying to graduate school, and it was not all rosy, I got two in particular. One was a telegram. That tells you how old I am. I got a telegram from a professor, a very well-known professor. I won't mention names or universities, but basically in that telegram told me to look at a university that was a little less competitive. So that put a large chip on my shoulder. Another one, again, will remain unnamed. I put together a nice package, a cover letter, covering my experience and interests and my resume and my transcripts. And basically I got my materials back with my cover letter, and across my cover letter was written no. And that lit a fire in me. So I actually thank those two individuals. I don't think they're with us anymore, but because they did propel me to be better, I guess, and continue pursuing it. So I didn't stop there. So I was persistent, but then on the other hand, then I got a personal phone call from a guy who got my letter, and then another one reached out to me, and it's just like, okay, so for the couple bad ones, there were some great ones too, and so it's finding the right person, the right situation, and persistence. It's like Scott said, if you're passionate about it, don't be afraid to talk to professors. If you got a local university with a fish and wildlife program, natural resources, or whatever they're calling them, and just go knock on doors. Face to face is great. Usually folks are very happy to see people and interested in helping students out. I mean, that's why Scott got into this field, I'm sure, in academia. It's just like, helping students grow and
Now, it's not going to be 100%, but kind of as a general rule, the universities in your state that have the word state in their title are probably the ones that are going to more likely to have the programs that you're interested in. Not getting the weeds, because they're the land grant universities. So if it's a place to start, if you're just going, I don't have no idea where to look, every state's got to have one that has a state in their name. Start there. Probably Rhode Island doesn't, or New Jersey, but Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, Colorado State, Washington State, Oregon State. Place to start.
And would you encourage even high school students to even start looking at those programs as well?
Absolutely. If you're already in an undergraduate program and you're thinking about graduate programs, find that professor who's in your department and who's closest to what you want to do, and talk to them. They can tell you who's out there doing that kind of work, where the people are doing waterfowl research. They're going to know.
Yeah, and I think for high school students, I got a call from a young man in Indiana once, and his goal was to work for Ducks Unlimited someday, and so he asked me how to do that, and he said that his parents had told him that he was almost too late in thinking about this and like reaching out for advice. And I said, you're in high school. I said, you're way ahead of the game. I said, most of us don't know what we want to do until way later in the game. I mean, I kind of knew, but he asked really good questions about, well, do I need to go to a university with a waterfowl wetlands program for my undergrad? I said, well, not necessarily. That would be helpful if that's what your career passion is, and they have waterfowl classes and wetland ecology classes and things like that you can start taking. That's going to better prepare you for that. But also look for volunteer opportunities. Depending upon what it is, any kind of wildlife field, if you can volunteer or work as a technician and gain valuable experience. You had talked about him having a senior thesis and things like that. I mean, just get involved, go the extra mile, build that resume, build that experience. I think for me it was super, super critical because I wasn't, self-admitted, I was not the best undergraduate student. I had a whole bunch of other stuff going on in my life and it wasn't priority one. And so I was kind of behind a little bit, go to grad school, they can take somebody who's got a 4.0 or a 3.0. Well, who are they going to take? Not John. So I set forth on a path of building my resume and my references and being the hardest worker and going the extra mile and doing that kind of thing. But that's the level. I mean, that's what I'm looking for. And I'm sure Scott, it's like you're working for hard workers and people that are passionate and going to do the work. Because it's a tough degree program. I mean, the field research component of it, and some are different than others, but it's a lot of work. It's a commitment. Ben's got a 4-year whatever commitment, and a master student is a good 3-year commitment. I mean, it's a commitment both from the academic side of things, the advisor, and the student. And so you got to know that going in, and you got to be passionate about it and make that commitment.
Yeah. And we're going long, but a couple other quick things. It's not just about grade point average, as John said. Yeah, that's important. Okay, if you're walking out the door with a 2.0 grade point average, you're going to have a very hard time finding a program. So it's important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. In my entire history as a professor, I've never taken a graduate student that did not have some field experience. They had to have some field experience because all field work looks great on paper. It looks like it's going to be so much fun. It's work. Mm-hmm. It's getting up at early hours and doing a lot of work. So if you haven't had that experience and you don't know at least what it's like, sorry, I can't have you learning on something where I've got a contract that's very critical. So experience. What have you been involved in? What are your references? Those are all going to come into play. Second thing one of the things I tell students is don't let them say no for you. Because if you see something and you go, well, I don't quite fit exactly what they're looking for, so you don't apply for it. You just said no for them. Mm-hmm. You never gave them a chance to turn you down. Now, maybe they'll turn you down, but if you didn't apply, you're going to never know. And you got to be persistent. Because what you want to do, and I got to tell you, the most fun I've ever had in this job is going out in the field with students. I like being in the classroom teaching, but going out in the field with students, there's still something about holding a wild duck in your hand. I mean, there's something about going out, one of my biggest thrills is holding baby bears. You hold a bear cub. How many people in the world get to do that? It's a great profession to be out there and do that. So, and right now, Ben gets to have all the fun. But that's fine, because I'm not so sure I could keep up with him in the field anymore.
Yeah, I was just saying that, too. It's like I don't think I could do what we did back in graduate school now.
Yeah.
Ben, how does that make you feel? Kind of now you're at the start of your career, and now with these guys, where they're at in their careers, how does that make you feel looking forward to what's kind of your next chapter after college?
Well, I'm not quite ready to grow up yet.
Well, why do you think we got in this field?
No, I really enjoy field work still, and I really enjoy research. So I want to keep doing research and applied research that answers a management question. And I'm really most interested in waterfowl and game birds. So that's what I hope to keep doing is waterfowl and game bird research.
Very cool.
Onto the grow up part. A few years back, we were out banding geese. It was a nice day in July. In a canoe out there herding geese on the lake. I'm getting paid for this. Can't beat that. Can't beat that.
Yep.
Yeah, we have a pretty scenic office, you could say. I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up here. We've been I think it'll be just a little bit of over an hour, but I appreciate you guys sitting down for an hour having this conversation. Really means a lot. Sharing your stories and your knowledge with everyone, all of our listeners. So, and thank you for letting me come up here and even document all of this, and doing what you had to do behind the scenes to let me come. So I greatly appreciate it.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you
Yeah,
for
it's
the time
great.
to come and document
Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you having you. And that hour went fast. That was great.
Yeah, no,
Conversation.
they go
It's like
quick.
a lot of fun.
But appreciate everyone who tuned in to this podcast. Like I said kind of earlier in the podcast, that this is our last research trip before hunting season. So moving forward, I believe we'll be traveling around the country, hunting with students, and having them share their stories of what it's like hunting in those areas and any other crazy stories that they might have. But
So how do we get in on that?
you gotta go back to college. You gotta go back to college, John.
Rodney Dangerfield, back to school.
Yeah. But no, we're gonna wrap up there. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next one.